Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our post-election live stream. I'm going to talk a little bit about the election results in a minute. I'll wait until the audience builds up a little bit first, so don't miss too many people. But we do have a special guest tonight, Mike Buchanan, who is a men's rights activist and anti-feminist, he might describe himself. So we're going to have a chat about feminism. I think we might agree about quite a few things. We might disagree about how to say them in some cases, but we shall see. We shall see. We had a debate about marriage a few months ago now that was quite sparky, shall we say, quite entertaining. So, yeah, Mike will be with us shortly. But first, I'll go through a few things that have been in the news. The first thing I thought I'd mention, Margaret Sanger, pioneer of the contraception, but in particular abortion movement in America and around the world. I've thought it was pretty common knowledge that she'd been found to have racist views. There are various quotations from her that showed she had racist views. And I mentioned that. It was maybe in a live stream a while ago or in a video. I mentioned it and someone emailed me saying, actually, that's not right. That's based on quotes out of context. So, okay, right, that's interesting. So I had a look into it. And I'll tell you what I found. Two quotes seem to be the centerpiece of the case for saying that Margaret Sanger was racist. So here's the first one. On the other hand, the mass of ignorant Negroes still breed carelessly and disastrously, so that the increase among Negroes, even more than the increase among whites, is from that part of the population least intelligent and fit and least able to rear their children properly. Now, people present that as though she was saying that it's the Negroes generally form this part of the population. But I haven't looked into it. That's not what she was saying. She was saying that what she saw as the good service of preventing the least intelligent and fit population section of the population from reproducing, that good service had been provided to white people, and it also needed to be provided to black people as well. That's what she was basically saying. So she's definitely guilty of eugenic thinking. There's no doubt about that. Guilty as charged. But that quote isn't actually showing any sort of racial bias. And the killer quote that you often hear, I've heard it a few times, is this one. So she said, "We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if ever it occurs to any of their more rebellious members." Now that gets quoted in a way as if she's saying, we don't want them to realize that we're out to exterminate them. We don't want them to, we are out to exterminate them, but we don't want them to realize that. But if you look at it in context, she wasn't saying that at all. She was fearing that the black people might see it in that way. Even though it's not true, they might see it in that way. So I thought that was interesting. So we always need to be careful with our own side as well. I mean, that looking at sort of pro-life websites, pro-life activists, I mean, that misinformation basically was out there quite commonly. Now, if someone wants to give me the next chapter of the story and tell me I'm missing some, or I've got the wrong end of the stick, then email or put in the comments, and we will have a look into it. But we always need to be careful of our own side. Don't assume that everything that comes from people who are basically on your wavelength is going to be accurate and presented in the most honest way. Because in that case, it seems to me that it wasn't. So I learn something every day. Right, next little story for you. Dr. Colin Morrison, the man who wants to break down the barrier between childhood and sexuality, and therefore got the job of producing sex education resources for use in Scottish schools. I wrote to the Scottish government a couple of months ago now, saying this person's not suitable for the job and he shouldn't be on the Scottish Education Council because of his very concerning views. And they replied just with, waffle, didn't begin to address the issue. So I did a press release about it, sent it to all the newspapers. I mean, not expecting any of them to pick it up because basically they never do. But I realized today the Daily Express had run a story on it. I hadn't realized, but they had run a story. But it's very frustrating how they ran the story. They said, Dr. Colin Morrison, this is what he does. They quoted the bits from my letter, my press release, saying, these are the quotations from his PhD dissertation. What do then? They invite someone from the Scottish Conservatives to comment on it. they phone up the Scottish Conservatives. So a big photograph of the Scottish Conservative MSP who says, probably some parents and teachers will be concerned about this. So the Scottish Conservatives, they made no effort to find out about the issue. Once they were off the phone, once the MSP was off the telephone talking to the Daily Express, they will probably never cross her mind again. It will do nothing to follow it up, nothing to press the issue home at all. But the Daily Express gave the Conservatives the big picture centerpiece of the article. Then it gets to the very end of the article, and it just said that the letter was written by Richard Lucas of the Scottish Family Party. That's what we're up against in the media. The agenda of the Daily Express is to promote the Conservative Party. It's as simple as that. They want to promote the Conservative Party. They don't want to address any issues. They don't want to give a fair hearing to anyone else. Their agenda is to promote the Conservative Party. So if we raise an issue that would make people think, oh, that's good, Scottish Family Party picked up on that. Right, well done them. Yeah, I'm on their wavelength. They don't want that to happen. So they'll take the issue, they'll present it in a way that puts the Conservatives front and centre. So even though they've done nothing about this issue and will do nothing about it, apart from just, but if the Daily Express phones up and says, would you like to criticise the SNP? Well, obviously, any Conservative is going to say, oh, yeah, we will. Yeah, we think that's wrong, whatever you're talking about. Yeah. And that's what happens. So that's what we're up against in the media. So I didn't even know they'd run the story, but someone let me know today. But another thing I would just mention, I'll come to a few comments in a minute. Keep the comments coming in. I'll say have a look in a minute. I've already banned Malcolm Mackenzie, so hopefully he's not going to pop up this week. But someone emailed after our little rally on Saturday and said, oh, at the rally, there's lots of talk about family, but I'm a single person. How do I fit into the Scottish Family Party? I feel like I'm, maybe excluded from it. I would sometimes hear that sort of comment from various directions. And the thing I would say to emphasize, the Scottish Family Party is not a party that's wanting to represent families, to have, it's not like a families union that argues to get a better deal for families. That's not, because a lot of other political parties, they do take that sort of line. Like the Labour Party would say, if you're a worker, if you're an employee, particularly working for the government, we're on your side. We'll try and get you high wages or whatever. We don't say that. We're not saying we want these family-friendly policies because we're on the side of families and it's in our self-interest. It's because we think that's what's best for society. So whether a person is single, married, divorced, retired, whatever, people can still look at our policy and think, yes, that is a recipe for a much healthier society. So that's what we're based about. So we're not saying we're a party for people in the families. Well, everyone's connected to a family somewhere or another, or virtually everyone. We're not saying it's a party for that sort of person. It's a party with a policy platform, a lot of which is centered on strengthening family life, because we think that's the missing ingredient in Scottish political debate, one of the missing ingredients in Scottish political debate. So hopefully that answers the question. If you read our policy booklet or our manifesto on the website, there's a paragraph very early on in the introduction that makes similar points. It says, people's path through life takes them in all sorts of different directions. Some people, have their own families. Some people don't. Sometimes it works out the way people want it. Sometimes it doesn't. But what we're trying to do is to strengthen family life overall in the nation because of the benefits that would bring. Right, so hopefully that's answered that one. Right, I'll talk about the results, and I've got one more little issue to mention, and then I will bring on our special guest. Right, so how did we do in the election? Well, very pleased. Last year in the Scottish election on the list vote, where everyone in Scotland had the opportunity to vote for the Scottish Family Party, out of a choice of about, was it 21 parties? And overall, our vote was 0.59%. This year, we had candidates in just under a quarter of the wards, in 84 wards. So that's quite a big sample we're taking there. And they average 1.34%. So more than twice as much. So the percentage more than doubled from last year. Now, maybe a fairer comparison, for various reasons, I won't go into the details, would be last year we had 7 constituency candidates. And last year, every house should have got a leaflet. So those 7 constituency candidates, the House had a leaflet, and there were only maybe 6 parties on the ballot paper. It wasn't like the list where you've got 20 to choose from. There were just 6. In the council elections, there were usually just about 6 parties to choose from. So in the constituencies last year, they averaged 1%. And in the constituencies, in the wards where we put a leaflet through pretty well every letterbox this time, we got 1.9%. So as best we can, that's a straight comparison. There's lots of ifs and buts. So by both of those, it shows our vote sort of roughly doubling within a year, which is good news. I mean, if that carries on, if it keeps doubling every year, by the year 2030, we will have 512% of the vote. So that's very encouraging. But even just, adding on, roughly 1% a year. Westminster election, a couple of years. If we're on, 1.5-ish now. Westminster election, 2.5, I don't know, 2.5, 3.5, who knows? Scottish election after them, 3.5, 4, 5. That puts you in with a chance of an MSP. So I've been saying I'm not one for every election coming out and saying, oh, this is it. This is going to be the breakthrough. We're going to get candidates elected this time. And then afterwards, you have to be, you've got your tail between your legs saying, oh, well, it'll be next time and whatever. Basically, you lose credibility. If you keep saying, oh, this is it, we're going to win some this time, you lose credibility. But I keep saying, we're climbing a mountain and we've taken another step up it, a very significant step up it. So that is good. Our highest percentage in a ward was 3.5%. Hamish Goldie Scott down in, Mid Berwickshire, I think it's called. Hamish Goldie Scott, 3.5%. Our previous highest result in a constituency or a region was 1.2%, which is myself and Steve Saunders in the last election. We got 1.2% in our constituencies. So Hamish got 3.5. Phil Tanzer got just a shade under 3%. Lots of candidates got over 2%, well over 2%. So overall, we're very pleased. Out of our 84 candidates, only one of them got a lower percentage than our average for the whole of Scotland last year. So only 1 out of 84 was below. 83 out of 84 were above our average for last year. So whichever way you look at that, it's progress. It's a very significant improvement. But the numbers are still small, but that's where we are. And we keep moving upwards. But sometimes people think there's a magic bullet to accelerate progress. If you just did this, if you just did that, have you thought about this? But there isn't a magic bullet. The other thing we found from our election results is that the wards where the candidates put a lot of work in did better. I mean, it makes a difference. Putting the effort in does better. I mean, the ward where I was in, I worked very hard. I put a leaflet through every letterbox. But the chap in the ward next door who didn't campaign at all, he said, he wasn't going to campaign. He was never going to campaign. He just put his name down so people could vote for him. He actually got more votes and a higher percentage than me. And I did 130 hours probably with a team of people helping, delivering leaflets. So it shows the area is very important. It has a huge influence. But overall, we've been very pleased with the results. And onwards and upwards. We'll now, before too long, we'll start thinking about the Westminster election, which will probably be in 2 years' time. And we'll start interviewing candidates, allocating them to constituencies, and sort of laying the groundwork for that campaign. 2 years seems like a long time. It's actually about the ideal time to be planning for an election, because there's a lot you can do in the meantime. 3 years, it seems a bit too distant, but 2 years, I think, is a good time to be starting to think about it. Right, let's just... And to talk about women, to any form of Indian bread, talking about women, myself. Oh, a man gets to talk about women. Yes, indeed. World War. To some extent. Possibly right. Do you ever talk about men? Yes. Yeah, we've talked about men's issues. I've got, yeah, well, I wouldn't say more about that for now. It's quite a big issue. Right. First time SFP voter. Right. Thank you very much, Carol. One of the many. And yeah, hope you can vote for us in the future as well. And okay, right, let's say welcome to our guest. Mike, thanks for coming to join us again.
Hello, Richard. It's a great pleasure. I enjoyed last time, and I'm sure I'll enjoy this evening.
Yes, yeah, lots of people enjoyed watching last time. I got quite a lot of views after it, so that was good. Now, Mike and I just had a quick chat before we went live, and Mike mentioned an issue that I'd noticed as well today. You've probably heard me say before, I listen to Radio 4 sometimes in the car. I'll just turn it on randomly, hear what's happening, and I sort of count how many seconds it is before it gets on to racism, sexism, LGBT, colonialism, climate change, one of their sort of pet issues. And the answer is, I'm not exaggerating. It's normally about 3 seconds. Doesn't matter what the program's about. So today I tuned in, and the program was about maps, history of maps. So no doubt, you know what they're saying. You know, this is it's a Western-centric. People from the Southern Hemisphere feel excluded by it. They want to redraw because all influenced by colonialism. We'll now go to someone from the Decolonizational Institute or something or other. It doesn't matter what the topic is. That's what it ends up with. As Mike, you were saying, you just find the is it Radio 4 you listen to and find the same thing?
No, I used to, but honestly, it's I find it's gosh, it creates mental health issues for me. Radio 4. It is seconds. You're quite right. You can be listening to anything. Gardener's Question Time. There'll be something in there. It's truly appalling. But no, I listen to BBC Radio 3 quite a bit, classical music, and the transatlantic slave trade. They managed to shoehorn that in every damn day.
Yeah.
It's appalling. So I will recommend to people a book I'm reading at the moment. Douglas Murray's The War on the West. Absolutely outstanding, as always, with Douglas Murray.
Yeah. Well, I think if people are listening to that BBC output uncritically, they'll just take on that these are the pressing issues in the world. You will very rarely hear anything about like people who are short of food or haven't got the medical care that they need. You know, they're blind for lack of a fairly cheap operation. All sorts of these issues. Not interested because it doesn't tick one of their boxes. The other thing I find, there's endless stories about people who are ill or disabled. Now, as far as I'm concerned, you know, hearing about people's experience of being ill, okay, that's fine. That's part of life. People who are disabled, overcoming obstacles, achieving things. Okay, you know, again, that's part of life. I'm quite happy to hear about it. But there's just so much of it. If it says, you know, mountaineering, if there's a story on mountaineering, it seems like it's more likely to be about, you know, the one-legged mountaineer than it is about someone who's, you know, broken a record. There's just so much of it. Have you noticed that? So why is that then? What's the agenda there?
Sorry, Richard. I think it's a question of, I mean, on every issue, the BBC has you know, it divides everything into two sides, and it will only cover one side. So, for example, on climate change, you'll never hear anything about all the evidence which suggests that the CO2 theory of global warming kind of doesn't make much sense when you really look at it. But they'll never talk about that. We interviewed a guy for our last conference, Robin Aitken, I'm sorry, who used to work on the Today program, and he was talking about a seminar many years ago, which the BBC, I think it was Greenpeace or Friends of the Earth or something, were hosted this conference at the BBC headquarters, and somebody senior in the BBC said, "Well, the science is very clearly settled. We shall henceforth not give any airspace to airtime to anybody who is critical of that consensus." Well, you don't have to do too much research to realize there is not a great consensus. But it's true of everything. It's true of you know, feminism. Feminism runs through everything. You know, men's rights just never gets mentioned. Female genital mutilation all the time. Male genital mutilation never. Although the first is, has specific legislation and has, huge resources devoted to ending it, and it is pretty well ended in the UK. Whereas male genital mutilation is completely ignored.
Yeah, I mean, male circumcision is a topic I haven't finished thinking my way through yet, so I'm not going to respond to that. We'll maybe talk about that another day. I've read a couple of papers on it. It's quite interesting. You're talking about there the failures to get the balance. I think that's certainly true, and in politics too. So when it comes to feminism, I mean, it's true. I mean, you could watch politics, you could watch the BBC, you could probably sit in classrooms in Scotland, you could go to lectures around the UK for years on end, and you would come to the conclusion that just everyone, or at least all women, but virtually everyone, is a feminist, has completely signed up to feminist principles. But what's the reality?
Well, the reality, there was a survey conducted by the Fawcett Society, a radical feminist charity going back to the mid-19th century. They conducted a survey in 2015, published in 2016 in a thing called the State of the Nation, I think. And I'm astonished to this day that they published this finding. The survey by a reputable company found that only 9% of British women and 4% of British men identify as feminists. So 1 in 11 women, 1 in 25 men. From all this, the geniuses at the Fawcett Society concluded that the country was a country of hidden feminists. You couldn't make this stuff up, Richard. You really couldn't.
Yeah. I saw some stats once. I think I saw 27% of women. I mean, there's probably different ways of asking the question, but whichever way you ask it, it seems there's clearly a minority. And yet the main political parties, they operate on the assumption that the way to appeal to female voters is by taking the feminist line.
Well, this is the interesting thing, Richard.
It's strange, isn't it?
This is the interesting thing, because all the parties chase the female vote. None of them chase the male vote. It's really quite extraordinary. They're all fishing in the same pond, and there's an equally big pond, and it doesn't occur to them that maybe that it'd be easier to get votes there. And there is, of course, only one politician in the English-speaking world, elected politician, who ever talks on men's issues, and that's Philip Davis, MP, who's spoken at 3 of our conferences. We actually had 3 more Tory MPs lined up to speak at our last conference. All 3 of them pulled out without explanation.
Just going back to the sort of democratic issue, you say all the parties try and court women's votes. I think that's definitely true, but they do it by taking a feminist line. But does that actually appeal to women? If only 9% or whatever, 20%, whatever, refer to themselves as women, are they actually being successful in courting the female vote, or are they missing the mark? I mean, you would assume that they're quite sophisticated in their focus groups and polling or whatever. But do you think they're missing the mark there, or are they appealing to women?
It's a very good question, Richard. We have I was very struck by your your last conference speech, and it's, in fact, it's informed. I mean, along with other things that your party's done, it's informed our manifesto and much else. The position that we take on abortion, for example, it's our view that the choices are not between the current 24 weeks for elective abortion and stopping it. It's between 24 weeks and perhaps 13 weeks, and there is some support in Parliament for that. So that's the position we've taken, but it's a step on a longer journey as far as we're concerned. And I was always struck at conferences, particularly the Conservative conferences, when we were campaigning on issues like domestic violence and abortion and so on. 9 out of 10 of the people who'd come up to me, if I had a pro-life placard and leaflets, 9 out of 10 of them would be women. The men kind of like shuffled along, a little bit embarrassed. But the women, they would say, yes, we're with you on abortion. We're with you on domestic violence. We know as many men suffer domestic violence as women. But no, I think the parties are hopelessly out of touch.
Yeah. I mean, for example, the appeal to mothers from all the parties, elected parties, is always, we'll look after your children for even longer than's available at the moment. where the evidence shows that basically, so the majority of mums would prefer to be able to be with their own kids for longer and have to work less when they're working part-time, whatever. They would prefer to shift the balance in the direction of more time with the kids. But all the parties assume that they're thinking the exact opposite.
Indeed. Well, we have things in our manifesto, for example, the personal tax allowance, to make that up to 100% transferable in the case of families with 4 kids, and stepped, from 10% below that, and a doubling of child benefit.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got a fully transferable tax allowance for married couples. Full stop. That's okay. When it can be afforded. We're not saying you do that instantly, regardless of the cost. It would obviously have to be done in a measured way, but that's what we would prefer. I mean, so do you think? I think a lot of female voters there. So if a woman's thinking, I would actually prefer to be with the kids a bit longer. I don't really want to be working as much as I am. Because no politician ever addresses that issue. Do they maybe not think about that as being a valid political issue? So if I was on TV every night saying, this is what we'd like to offer. We'd like to give parents, mums, dads, mums in particular, we'd like to give more choice. Currently, there's lots of support, childcare for mums to work more. We'd want to have systems in place that enable mums to make the decision to be at home with the kids as well, to try and make that easier for them. I mean, would that result in a huge swell of support when there's a wake up to the fact that it is possible to receive help for that?
Well, we've been very upfront, Richard, about our political strategy is basically the UKIP and Brexit party strategy to bounce the major parties, by which probably the Conservatives. I mean, UKIP had virtually no MPs elected, but changed the course of British history. Nigel Farage, I believe he's not the most popular man in Scotland, but he's a political hero to me, as was Mrs. Thatcher, who again may not be the most popular woman in Scotland, I recognise. But at the end of the day, I mean, if you take the Bedford constituency where I'm standing next time, anybody, man or woman, who wants to reduce the maximum term for elective abortions has only one party to vote for. All the major parties are not going to move on 24 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only one seat, but from small acorns and all that.
Yeah, I would say with the pro-life issue, if you take the Scottish Conservatives, for example, even if they wanted to make it their policy, I mean, but they don't. I mean, how many Scottish Conservative MSPs are there who are pro-life? I mean, maybe 2 or 3. How many of them have I heard make a pro-life statement? 0. Absolutely 0. I have never heard a Scottish Conservative MSP make the slightest noise in a pro-life direction. But even if they did want to, it wouldn't make sense for them electorally, because you're talking about 10 or 15% of the population who are sort of fairly clear pro-life. So for the Scottish Conservatives who are trying to get 40% of the vote, then it makes no sense to make that as a policy. It just makes no sense. Right. Whereas for us, it makes perfect sense.
No, indeed. But I think there are other issues, Richard. And here I would very much like to talk just for a little bit about our number one area of concern, which is children being denied access to a parent following family breakdowns. I think that's it's child abuse. It's also abuse of the non-resident parent, 90% of the time the father, but also grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins. It's a long list of people, and a lot of those people have votes. So again, in Bedford, I mean, if you want to guarantee, that children sees both parents after family breakdowns, there's one party to vote for.
Yeah. I mean, you're saying earlier on about feminism not being an equality movement, or never having been, or isn't anymore. What do you mean by that? In what way is it not an equality movement? Could they claim to be?
Right, it certainly claims to be, and sometimes I get hit over the head by a feminist with the dictionary definition, which is the pursuit of gender equality. It's just hilarious. Certainly, if you go back to, I don't know, 1851, 1852, the Seneca Falls Convention in New York, um, which for a lot of us, we would see that as the birth of modern feminism. It was not about equality in any sense. It was about extending female privilege and feminism. I mean, there have been one or two areas for a short period of time, but feminism, its its DNA, if you like, is to increase women's privileges. And I'm always amused.
So just go back to Women's Conference again. Did you say
1851 or 1852?
I mean, surely in those days that they were fighting for equality under the law, to go to school, to go to university, to own property within a marriage. I mean, were they the central issues? Surely they're genuine equality issues, aren't
they? There are so many. Well, I mean, for example, I mean, if we look at it in the much of the Victorian era in the UK, I'm not terribly familiar with the estates, but in the UK,
mm-hmm.
If a woman incurred a debt in the Victorian era that she couldn't settle, the husband went to debtor's prison. So basically, feminists are forever misrepresenting male responsibility for male power. And if anybody wants to read a cracking book about feminism, the first one I think I'd recommend to people was written in 1913. It's called The Fraud of Feminism by Ernest Belford, a socialist philosopher and journalist. And he absolutely nailed it. He was writing about the fraud of feminism in the late 1880s.
So if you go back to like financial arrangements within marriage, so you're saying what's interpreted as, for example, women not being able to own property. I don't know to what extent legally the finances were combined. I mean, did that not leave women at a disadvantage in the case of marital breakdown? Or
no.
I mean, overall, you think it was a fair deal then?
Well, I mean, the point is that the man was responsible for the joint finances. So but that's it's a different era, Richard, to put it mildly, isn't it?
How about education then?
Whenever a feminist tells me she wants equality, I thank her and say, which of your privileges are you happy to give up?
So just saying 1843, that I mean, education. I mean, there weren't equal educational opportunities, so that would have been part of what the feminists were asking for then. I mean, so that was a genuine equality issue, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm not saying there weren't any, Richard, but we could spend the next half hour talking about the 19th century, and I suggest there's a lot more in the 21st and 20th century that would be.
But I was saying that because you did say that right from the beginning it wasn't about equality.
No, but
I would say that there were some equality issues.
All right. It would take me an hour to really sort of go into that in detail, and none of us have the patience for that, Richard. But if you take, I mean, something that we have in our manifesto 21 areas, 21 issues that we have, and I think in 16 of them women are privileged, which leads to the disadvantaging of men, or females and males anyway, if we put it that way. I'm not aware of a single area where in 2022, where are we? 2022, that's right. In Britain, women's rights specifically, or female rights specifically, are assaulted. I'm aware of 16 or 17 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted, and I'd say almost always to privilege women and girls. But
could you give us a couple of examples of those?
Well, a very obvious one, Richard, and I know I've touched on it, and perhaps we'll touch on another day, is genital mutilation or circumcision.
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about that. I haven't quite prepared myself to talk on that.
Okay,
yet, so
fair enough.
I missed one.
Okay, but male circumcision has been illegal since 1861, but it goes on all the time. Okay, well, in the case of education, in the 1987-88 academic year, certainly in England, but I think across the UK, I stand to be corrected possibly, O levels were replaced by GCSEs. And prior to that, contrary to popular opinion, boys and girls were doing actually very similar, within 1 or 2% year on year, slight variation year on year. And the entire point of moving to GCSEs was to allow both male and female teachers pro-girl bias to reflect in grades. And if you look at if you check out William Collins's book, The Empathy Gap, which is available by the way in ebook format for under £5, an absolute steal, he shows that the gender the education gender gap appeared that year, and it's been with us ever since.
So what was different about the exams that brought that about, do you think?
Well, it wasn't exams, Richard. It was the fact that a substantial proportion of the grades were down to teachers' assessment. So they were subjective, and it was known even at that point that both male and female teachers, you know, had a bias towards giving girls higher grades, and so they knew in doing this that girls would do better than boys. It was really quite as simple as that.
I mean, it's also, I think, quite well known that girls basically tend to do better on coursework as well. They'll be a bit more conscientious, putting the effort in on the coursework throughout the 2 years. I suppose the counter argument to that could be, well, is that not still a fair part of the assessment? Who's to say that just doing it on the exam is the fairer one? And maybe the fair result is that the girls do actually do better, and including the coursework is it's just a reflection of that. Now, of course, that argument would never be accepted the other way around. But could there be a case for that?
I don't think so, Richard. I mean, previously to that, to say it was virtually nip and tuck, you know, exactly the same. But there's you know, there's I can touch on plenty more areas.
Just to say in the exams, I'll tell you another factor I believe would be a factor there. Basically, when GCSEs came along, it got easier. O levels were tougher.
Yes.
So O levels used to be grading people at the, you know, the upper end of the IQ distribution. Let's put it like that. And generally, virtually anything you can measure about men and women, men tend to be more varied in it. So they would tend to be more at the extremes, more at the extreme low end, more at the extreme high end. So if you're measuring at a part of the distribution where you're to the point where there's going to be more towards the extremes, so there's going to be more, you know, you're looking at like very high IQ for an A grade at O level, or, you know, relatively high IQ, that it's likely that you're going to get more, or more boys will be doing well there. I mean, similarly, if you introduce a qualification that's really, really easy and almost everyone can pass, then more boys will fail it than girls. If you introduce a qualification that's really difficult and only a few will pass, then probably more boys are going to pass it than girls. So that might be a part of the factor as well.
Yes, because of the IQ bell curves. Absolutely right. Mm-hmm. But in our party's launch video, I included some information from a channel called History Debunked, and the historian who runs that compared maths questions for 11-year-olds in the 11 plus in 1970, which was just before calculators, and maths questions in a 2016, I think it was, O level. So 16-year-old. So you're basically comparing 11-year-olds in 1970 with 16-year-olds in 2016, and the questions were stratospherically more difficult back in 1970 with no calculator than in 2016. One of the questions I remember was write down in numbers the four. So that was just written out in English, you know, 8,034. Mm-hmm. One was, and the O level was, what is a quarter of 16? I love the idea of a 16-year-old using a calculator for that, but who, you know, the dumbing down in the education system in the last 50 years is a national scandal.
Yeah,
an absolute scandal.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about the inverse Flynn effect. The Flynn effect was a measured increase in average IQ over a number of decades. It was monitored quite closely. But some people now are talking about the inverse Flynn effect. They basically think average IQ is declining. And I think if you look back at say, Victorian and earlier, you know, Georgian times, look at the way people wrote. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, like the orders Wellington wrote on the back of his horse in the middle of the Battle of Waterloo. There's not many people who can write English so elegantly and precisely under any circumstances. Now, so I think there's possibly a case.
I'd also like to talk about I mean, grade inflation.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the educational scandal. So you have, in particular, I think, I mean, 60% of university students today are female, and they get such grades. The number of students who get first today, compared to when I did my degree 40 years ago, is I think it's like 3 times as many.
Mm-hmm.
So sorry.
Whatever's going on in England, you should hit. I'll just tell you what's going on in Scotland. In Scotland, they're obsessed with the attainment gap. They want pupils in wealthy areas to get the same results as pupils in less wealthy areas. So they basically define the science of heredity and IQ, basically. That they're going to sort of overcome that by throwing money at schools. And they've been throwing money at it for years and getting basically absolutely nowhere. They can't close this gap, obviously. But then along came the lockdown, and instead of doing exams, they did coursework and teacher assessment. And the grade inflation at the schools in poorer areas was just absolutely outrageous, completely ridiculous. So the Scottish Qualifications Agency said, "Whoa, this is just a bit crazy. We're just going to tone it down a little bit. We're not going to take them right down to what they should be statistically, but we're just going to, tone it down a little bit to make it a bit more realistic." But then you get kids in the street waving placards saying they've been discriminated against. So the government capitulates, tells the Scottish Qualifications Authority, okay, whatever the teacher said, that's their grade. And of course, lo and behold, the attainment gap has been closed. Huge progress closing the attainment gap. So now the Scottish educational establishment in general is saying we've cracked it. This is what we need to do to close the attainment gap. Just have the teachers marking the work. I say making up the grades. Maybe that's a bit flippant, but sort of internal assessment. And they're even saying now, that if you have the same assessment process carried out in the school, then even that's discriminatory. If you say these are the criteria you need to mark it by, and it's got to be the same in every school, they're saying no, that's discriminatory because it's not tuned to the special needs of the poorest pupils. It's only the teachers who know them who can really assess their progress.
I wonder if we could go on to another area, Richard, of female privilege, which is sentencing, the criminal justice system. Men are sentenced far more harshly than women. And again, William Collins is The Empathy Gap is the book to go for here. But he shows basically that if men were sentenced as leniently as women, a sizable majority of men in British prisons would not be there. And in fact, we could probably close 3/4 of the prisons in the UK on that basis. So, I mean, so I say to a feminist, well, if you want gender, if you're after gender equality, do you want women to be sentenced as harshly as men? I've yet to have a feminist say she wants that kind of equality, because that's totally the wrong sort of equality, of course.
So why does that happen? I mean, that's not written into the law, I assume. That's just judges.
Yes and no. I mean, there's plenty of guidance there's plenty of guidance to judges. I mean, just to finish my previous point, I mean, I think there are about 85,000 men in British prisons, 5,000 women. They're closing the women's prisons and building another 20,000 places, which will all go to men. Why does it happen? Gynocentrism. Society is concerned about privileging women, holding men to account, not holding women to account.
Now, in Scotland, there's a deliberate policy to avoid women going to prison and to basically eliminate women's prisons. I mean, is that the same in England? Is that the same
across the UK? Yes, absolutely, across the UK. And of course, then there's the women's trump card of being a mother. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if a woman commits a crime that, if she were not a mother or if she were a man, would get a prison sentence, she should go to prison. I mean, women, we get plenty of female criminals, serial female criminals, who know that they will not be sentenced to a prison sentence.
Yeah, I would say that's a tricky one. If I was a judge, that would be a factor in my thinking. I don't mean, I wouldn't send a woman to prison if she just like murdered 6 other people in her family or something. But in a borderline case, that might be a factor.
I'm not talking about borderline cases, Richard. I'm talking about cases where a man would go into prison for years, And at the end of the day, should we not? It's all about accountability. Should we not expect a mother of a child, perhaps a very young child, to not commit serious crimes?
Yeah.
But
I suppose the
always,
deterrent effect would be stronger.
there's always a female card to be played that,
Mhm.
that we just will not hold women accountable in the way that we hold men accountable.
So the statistics on this, where do they come from? Are they like from official? Are they acknowledged by in the legal system that that's the case?
What, that men are sentenced far more harshly.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there's no question. I mean, just read William Collins. I mean, it's you know, it's
Yeah.
the
Is the sort are the statistics from within the legal system though, or is this an
yes,
outside observer?
no, absolutely.
And what do they say about them?
From the Department of Justice? Well, I know for a fact, Richard, from a Conservative MP that I know, he had a discussion with the Justice Secretary, and he said to the Justice Secretary, surely it's not fair in this day and age that women are sentenced so much more lightly than men. And this Conservative Justice Secretary said, well, of course they are, and I'm completely in support of that. What has this got to do with, gender equality? Feminists don't want gender equality. I've never heard of a feminist campaigning for that. They'll campaign for women in the boardroom, never for women in the sewers.
So actually, just going back to the punishments, sentences. I mean, in Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon announced a pardon to women who'd been punished as witches hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
Well, completely pointless, waste of time.
Yeah.
But she's just trying to, again, it's a feminist card to play. But you look at that. I mean, if she thinks that women were on the receiving end of unfair punishments there, particularly women, that's why she got involved in it. But currently, it looks like the balance is the other way. I don't know. I'm not saying which side's being treated unfairly. I would suspect it's probably women. In my view, it would be that some women criminals have been treated too leniently. But it's fascinating, isn't it, that a discrepancy like that can just go virtually uncommented on in a society. Well, would anyone really like to come out and would a politician like to come out and defend that publicly? I mean, do you think they would? I mean, if say Boris Johnson or Nicola Sturgeon or Keir Starmer, whoever, if they were put on the spot and asked, do you think it's right that women generally get less harsh sentences for identical crimes? What do you think they'd say?
That's a very good question, Richard. I don't know, but the media will never put those. The media is part of the problem. I mean, as you were saying right at the beginning, absolutely right. The mainstream media are as corrupted by feminism as anybody else. Well, I mean, I could talk for an hour on that subject alone.
But we've had another one for the questions. I went to scroll through and find it. Someone asked about the gender pay gap.
Oh God. Again, Collins destroys this. The gender pay gap, is very small, but it exists because men and women go into different tend to go into different lines of work. Women tend to go into lines of work to do with people and animals. Interestingly enough, most veterinary science graduates are women and have been for many years, whereas men go to things like engineering. Women also go into lines of work where they can practice locally, combine it with a family, whereas an engineer might have to be away for 6 months, perhaps overseas. So, it's always said that we need more female engineers, and for the life of me, I don't know why we do. Women don't want to go into the profession. When I last looked at this in 2015, £30 million had been spent trying to persuade more women into engineering, with very little effect. But the gender imbalance at universities is higher in the case of psychology. Over 90% of psychology students are women. And hey, guess what, Richard? That's not a problem that, we don't need more male psychologists, apparently.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or teachers. I mean, the decline in the number of male teachers or doctors. In the 1970s, Dr. Vernon Coleman, the first TV doctor, was reporting that medical schools were preferencing women for courses, and he said this will lead to disaster because women will not do evening work, they won't do weekend work, they'll want to work part-time whether or not they have children, and we see the GP service an absolute national scandal, and the reason is that most GPs for some time now have been women, and they work part-time whether or not they have children, and that's why it can take you 2 or 3 weeks to see a GP. Whereas when I was a young man, you could see a GP the same day or the next day.
But that's a knotty problem. That I know in Pakistan that they just had an open admissions policy to their medical schools, and through that policy, they ended up a substantial majority were women studying to be doctors in Pakistan, and they found in Pakistan that over their careers, the women worked a lot less years than the men did, and they eventually said, "We can't afford this. We're not a rich country. We can't afford to be training that almost twice as many doctors as we need, because they're only going to work for half of the time through their careers." So they actually put a cap on it. I don't know if they capped it on, I think maybe at 50-50, just to try and solve the problem. Now, in Britain, I find that's a really knotty problem to solve, because, I mean, does anyone really want to say, have quotas for male and female? I mean, that would be quite unfair on individuals. So I don't know the answer to that, but I guess what one answer could be requiring more sort of upfront commitment to it. So like you take on a loan to do the course, and there's quite a lot to pay back, a substantial amount to pay back. And then if doctors' salaries reflect that amount and you have to pay back, then that would mean so the risk of the investment would be more on the individual rather than on the state to spend all the money training a doctor, then only getting half a doctor from it. Maybe that would be a fair way, but it's a tricky one.
I don't think it's remotely tricky, Richard, to be honest with you. I mean, I think the reality is I think they got it right in Pakistan on this one. The figures are similar in the UK. You basically have to train 2 women to get the same lifetime work as 1 man. And so if there's any group, and the problem is, of course, that this feminization of the medical profession meant a huge slump in capacity. So how was that solved? It was solved by bringing in huge number of doctors from the third world, where they really couldn't afford to lose them. It's scandalous. Rather than say, 70% of medical students being women is a problem. It is leading to lots of, and you go to any hospital, Richard, and look at the number of male doctors, and I might say, and I'm not making a racist point here, the number of white male doctors. I mean, in my local Bedford practice, there are 10 doctors. One of them is a white man.
Yeah.
It's a social engineering exercise, the NHS.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Anyway, we could go back to subject choices. I mean, I've looked into that a bit in Scotland. In Education Scotland, our national education agency, as far as I can tell, there are 6 members of staff whose mission it is to persuade more girls to do physics and maths. Right. And the sum total of their efforts is 0, because it's just flatlining. But what happened? There was a time when basically girls weren't allowed to do those subjects, but then the gates were open; they could do them, stigma was taken off or whatever, and the proportion increased through the 1970s. But I think it was by the time we got into the 80s, it reached an equilibrium, and it's flatlined ever since, because it seems like boys and girls are just choosing to do what they want to do, and no matter what efforts are made, it makes no difference at all. But they will never admit that, though. They could never admit this. Okay, this is just natural. This is what people want to do. We're perfectly happy with that. I mean, they're never happy with it. They're just going to keep going. I always want to say, if you've done a gender studies degree and you're working for a government-funded sock puppet charity, why didn't you become the engineer? Why didn't you go and study physics? Well, I didn't like it. Well, that's not good enough. We need more women in. People like you need to get and sign on and study physics. I'm not very good at it.
The Conservative Party, I just put up a blog post recommending that voters in Belford don't vote for the Conservative candidate, because the Conservative Party has just announced, or the chairman announced, that they have a goal of gender parity among Conservative MPs. Now, I worked for the party from 2007 to 8, and at the time, the ratio of men to women in applying to be prospective parliamentary candidates was 10 to 1, and I'd be amazed if it had changed since. So basically, they're saying that they should be passing over 10 men in favor of 1 woman. Now, what are the chances that the best person out of those 11 people is the woman? Not high, is it? So, and this is the Conservative Party. They are basically taking on all the policies that Harriet Harman
Yeah.
And others of her type have been advocating that they've waved the white flag at feminism.
Yeah, but it's the same in the Scottish Parliament. I think all the parties, if they haven't got strict gender quotas, but they work pretty hard, and I think it is reflected in the quality of the MSPs. I'm not going to like point to individuals, but overall, I think it's reflected in Scotland.
Jess Phillips.
There was talk of introducing a law that forced parties to put forward 50% male, 50% female candidates in elections, which I think would be a sort of anti-democratic outrage. Because for us, that would be a massive problem. I mean, generally, men are more interested in politics than women. Men are, in general, more of them want to go into the public life. In general, men tend to be more conservative in their views than women. So for the Scottish Family Party, that's three factors that mean generally we're likely to have more male than female candidates. I mean, as it happens, our proportion of male-female candidates is about the same as like the Labour Party. And it's better that, well, I say better, there's more female candidates than the Conservatives. So we actually outdo or equal some of the parties who are making all sorts of special efforts to bring women on board. It just happens naturally.
Well, so I was going to say the Labour Party now, more than 50% of its MPs in Westminster are women. Mm-hmm. So logically, then, well, if we're after equality, yay, they should now be introducing all male shortlists. And this will surprise you, Richard, but they're not. No, so 50% is basically a floor. It was never a target; it was a floor. And it also, but the ceiling now is on men. Men cannot be more than 50%.
Yeah, yeah. And in areas where naturally there's going to be more men drawn to it, then it's just a discrimination against men. When people hear about the gender pay gap, I mean, I hope a lot of men are realizing that basically in terms of pay, they're likely to be being discriminated against. I was talking to someone the other week. They were saying within their company, there's pay is done individually. There's no like general agreement, it's done individually. And all the men were feeling, I thought I'd done pretty well. My review was really good, but that's quite a low increase. And they're thinking basically that the company's just got its eye on its gender pay gap. And you hear people say as well, in the company, if a young woman comes in, they just want to promote her as quickly as possible because they want women in senior positions. Because that's the company policy.
And I can tell you, Richard, I hear every week from men who say that a female colleague has been promoted above them, and people are just absolutely staggered. And these women often have to lean on the person that they've just been promoted over to enable them to do their job.
Yeah. Now, the danger with this, of course, is once you're into this, I mean, everyone's going to have disappointments in their career. So the temptation is for every man who doesn't get promoted and a woman does to think, it's by a sort of. But the big picture, it just is inevitable. As soon as a company starts thinking, well, they're vulnerable to government regulation and government reporting that's going to, at the very least, embarrass them, or they might end up with a legal case against them for their gender pay gap. So they're scared. They think we've got to make sure we're getting women promoted. And men need to wake up and realize that subtly they're probably being discriminated against one way or another in the process.
I think what I'm going to have to go very shortly, Richard, but I think what you're saying. I think what you're saying is, and I would agree with you, that men need to strap on a pair.
Well, maybe I wouldn't put it like that, but I think it's unaware, not putting two and two together, because the whole culture, I think adults are indoctrinated in Britain. So all the people working for a company, they're all getting the message that women are oppressed, that they need special promotion. We've got to change, close the gender pay gap. These are really important targets. I think a lot of men just sit there thinking, I'm not really that interested, but yeah, okay, fair enough. I don't know. So they're not really realizing what's happening. But you said you need to go away sharp at 10. I've very much enjoyed that chat. We didn't disagree with much after all.
We didn't. Thank you. Enjoyed it as always.
Yeah, great. So we will see you again.
Look forward to
that. Viewers, don't go away. I'll have a look at some of the comments before we finish, but I will say good night to Mike.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks very much for coming on. Good night. Right, I'll just have a quick look at a few comments and then we'll wind up. Right, what's this? Money or debt is a feminine thing. Spider's web. Right, I'm not quite sure about that one. Let's cost of living crisis, never mind the gender pay gap. Now, yeah, I would say about that. The thing is, all these things, gender pay gap, etc., etc. There's things that don't get to the heart of this. They're not the real issues that government should be focused on. They're not the real fundamentals. And perhaps the current challenges being faced by Britain and by Scotland might help the governments to focus more on what's really important. So that might happen. Let's hope so. So giving children choices at school, if you want boys and girls do the same. Now, that's interesting. Generally at school, boys and girls do the same up to a certain age, and then an element of choice comes in. When I was at school, when I was at primary school, okay, I'm not that old, okay? I sometimes can hardly believe this happened, but it did. When I was in my final year of primary school, the boys did science while the girls did needlework. Okay, the boys did science while the girls did needlework. But that was surely the last school in Britain where that happened, and that was the last year it happened, I would imagine. Surely that didn't carry on for much longer. So now, I mean, all pupils do study all subjects, so they get a flavour of them, and they have the opportunity to see what they're good at and to see what they like and see what fits in with their career ambitions. So I feel the system's about right in terms of when they make choices. I mean, the choices they make at age 14, they're not particularly dramatic. Well, with the National 5 system, I know a lot of schools, you don't actually do that many subjects. But if it's working properly, you're still doing, 8 subjects or so. So there's still a lot of flexibility. And going into the those higher, advanced higher, I think the degree of specialization there is appropriate. So from my point of view, I would say that's already happens. They have a chance to study all subjects, then they decide which ones to go forward with. Right, let's go this. What do Mike's more worried about? Africa losing valuable doctors or himself having to consult a black GP. I can't speak for Mike, but I think the issue of third world countries losing medical staff is very significant. A few years ago, 12 African nations sent a joint letter to the UK government saying, can you please stop taking our medical staff to come and work in the NHS? And as I understand it, the response from the British government was, no, we won't stop. It's we're going to take as many as we like. But it's a major problem for some poor countries. If you can barely afford to train, I mean, training medical staff is an expensive business. And if you're struggling to provide healthcare, that's a big investment you're making. Now, if you're making that investment in training medical staff and then they just disappear, then that's difficult. I suppose they could try and have legal restrictions, contracts that prevent people that they train from moving abroad. But I do think it is a genuine issue, certainly for some African countries. They've been very concerned about it. We need more female engineers, so there are not enough engineers. Yeah, that's sometimes the way it's presented, isn't it? We're short of engineers, and the reason is that not enough girls are becoming engineers. But that's just statistical jiggery-pokery, isn't it? The fact that there's less girls than boys, that doesn't show that the problem is not enough girls doing engineering. I mean, if you need more engineers, then basically you've got to improve the quality of your maths and scientific education through the school, and then present the options, show the pupils what it involves, the career possibilities, and then one would hope that would look after itself. Right, I'll just take one more. I feel like going on for longer. I'll try and keep to time vaguely closely. If you're part-time, you don't get paid a full-time wage. So why is equal pay an issue? I think when they talk about the gender pay gap, it's normally comparing people who are working full-time. It's quite a complicated thing to measure, but they're normally comparing people who work full-time. But it is a fact, aside from that, that women tend to work part-time a lot more than men. And if men and women are working full-time, men are more likely to work more overtime, whether it's paid or unpaid. Men are more likely to work longer hours. They're also more likely to apply for dangerous jobs or sort of dirty jobs. And also they're more willing to travel to work as well, travel greater distances. And generally they're more willing to relocate as well for their career. So they're quite distinct characteristics in general of the male and female workforce, which leads to the so-called gender pay gap. Right. Let's take one more. Right, statistics from the justice system. I haven't got those to hand. I have been aware of that. I've heard about that. I've looked at those. Probably if you did some research on the internet, I would guess you'd find something about those. Yeah, I think there's things out there, plenty out there. Okay. Feminist politicians want 50-50 in the government and the boardroom, but not on fishing trawlers. Yeah, I mean, that's the way it always goes, isn't it? It's the top jobs that they think matter, and the other jobs, the proportion doesn't matter. Which fits in with the theory that it's not about equality. It's about, often it's about promoting women like them. Because if you imagine yourself, you're into politics and you want to get to the top, what's going to suit you? Well, you want policies that support women like you getting into the top jobs. So I think the policies of a lot of the politicians and parties, they reflect self-interest of the female politicians, I have to say. I keep saying one more, don't I? But let's have a quick look. Right, let's leave it there. We'll leave it there. So next week we have a special guest. I can't remember who it is. So come on next week and we will see who that is. We'll be having meetings around the country before too long. We'll probably try and have a sort of round of meetings in our various usual venues before the summer, so through May and June. It would be great to see you at any of those. But for this evening, I will say good night.